Naturopathic doctor, Talia Marcheggiani here. I'm a mental health expert and I'm at Bloor West Wellness Clinic. And today we're going to talk about the stress-depression connection. Most of us are stressed in North America. There's a major stress epidemic. We know that anywhere from 70 to 90% of doctors' visits are directly or indirectly attributed to stress and the symptoms that it causes on the body. Most people are stressed. I think the estimate is 70% to 90% of North American women are experiencing some kind of chronic stress. Many are unaware of it, and very few are doing anything about it or actively managing their stress through methods of self-care, relaxation techniques, and other therapies to lower the cortisol or the stress hormones that are produced by chronic stress in the body. So physiologically, when we get stressed, so let's say you're, back in Paleolithic times, you're walking through the forest and you encountered a giant bear running towards you, our bodies would immediately start secreting epinephrine, or adrenaline, which is the first stress hormone. This is released from the adrenal glands. These are these pyramid-shaped endocrine or hormone glands located on top of both of our kidneys. Epinephrine or adrenaline, many of us have felt the effects of before. This makes our heart race, we start sweating, we start to, you might feel like you have to go to the washroom, you might notice digestive effects. What will happen is our blood vessels will dilate, our pupils will dilate so that we can't see fine detail, but we can see movement much more easily. So we can see the subtle movements of the bear lunging towards us, and our body is primed for fight, flight, or freezing so that we can get away from this immediate stressor, this immediate threat to our safety and survival. And really incredible things can happen when we're in this hyper-arousal state. It's in the sympathetic nervous system state. A friend of mine was walking in Greece and she fell off a sidewalk. The sidewalk just ended. And in the fall, she fell off this cliff and one of her arms broke. So she managed with this superhuman ability that all of a sudden she had through the adrenaline that was coursing through her body to deal with this stress and surprise. She, with the hand that wasn't broken, grabbed the edge of the sidewalk and pulled herself to safety. And this was a woman, my friend, that can't even do one pull-up. She can't do push-ups. She doesn't have the arm strength to, in a calm and not hyper-aroused state, perform that kind of physical act. So epinephrine and this stress response is amazingly powerful. This stress response can save our lives if called into action for the right reasons and at the right time. However, what's going on in North America now is that, especially in this kind of modern society that we live in with technology and all of the stressors that we're encountered on a day-to-day basis and the pressures that we put on ourselves, we're in that hyper-arousal state far more often than normal. Back when we were chased by bears and we had to respond physiologically to that stressor, we would have just, as soon as we reached safety or finished fighting the bear or froze, played dead so the bear would walk away, we would have returned back to a state of relaxation. I mean, our heart would have continued to pound as we kind of got over that stressor, but eventually we would have returned to our rest and digest state, our parasympathetic state. Back in those days, we used to work an estimated 15 hours a week, hunting, gathering food, in our Paleolithic times, in our hunter-gatherer times, which is what our genes have evolved to succeed in. Our genes haven't evolved to catch up with the rapid change in the environment that we've created for ourselves. And so we're not used to working 40 to 80-hour work weeks and racing home through traffic to pick up the kids and do after-school activities and finish up late assignments, getting to bed after 12 p.m. and getting up at 6 a.m. to do a workout so we can lose weight, and all of the things that are filling our lives and causing us stress. The issue with many of the women that I work with, many of the people that I work with, is that we don't really notice that we're under stress. Like, a lot of people will say that they don't feel stressed, and then the signs and symptoms that their bodies are exhibiting point me in a direction of some kind of stress response. So I describe what adrenaline and epinephrine do, but our body doesn't have a very big reserve of adrenaline and epinephrine. So when we're in that fight or flight response for prolonged periods of time, the adrenal glands, those pyramid-shaped glands on top of the kidneys, they start to secrete another hormone called cortisol. Cortisol has some similar effects, but it's better for prolonged periods of stress. Cortisol kind of makes us feel alert. It gives us this grounded energy, so we can be effective when we have these daily things thrown at us. So when we wake up in the morning, we feel kind of groggy, and then we start to feel alert. Maybe we have, a quick workout or a cold shower, or we eat something and we start to feel like we're becoming alive and greeting the day. That's cortisol starting to build up in our bodies and prepare us for the things that we have to do, for the mental tasks, or the physical tasks, or juggling of all the tasks that we have coming up for us in that day. Cortisol is a good thing. We want to have cortisol because without it, we can't perform. We can't be who we need to be, and we can't bring ourselves into the world and do the things that we're supposed to do that day. The problem is, of course, and I've already mentioned this, is when stress is prolonged. And when stress is taking over more than 50% of our day, and our bodies are in that fight or flight state for more time than they're in the rest and digest state. Some of the effects of being in this state, and as I mentioned, a fair amount of us are in this state most of the time, or have to be. Some of the effects are high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart diseases, even some cancers, suppressed immunity, things like skin issues, hormonal imbalances such as infertility or PCOS or endometriosis, changes in eyesight, changes in hearing, hair loss, acne, impotence, various other symptoms. And of course, depression and mental. One of the effects of cortisol is that it can lower serotonin, which is the feel good, the happy neurotransmitters that our brain secretes, and dopamine, another neurotransmitter that promotes feelings of well-being and happy mood, and also helps with that motivation and reward cycle. Cortisol also controls inflammation, and when we have too much of it, it suppresses inflammation, but once we start to become deficient in cortisol, inflammation can increase. And when our body's relying on cortisol all the time, the balance of cortisol can get thrown off, and we can have highs and lows of cortisol in the body. We know that there is an implication in inflammation and mood, so cortisol often is at the root of excess inflammation or inflammatory symptoms. There's also a condition that's not really recognized in conventional medicine, but naturopathic doctors recognize, as well as functional doctors. So functional doctors and naturopathic doctors, we don't really work with diseases that you come in with. I mean, we work with those too, but where we really excel is when we're looking at the patterns and the symptoms and the blood work that's showing disease processes before they actually become diseases. And I think depression and most mental health conditions fall in that area because we know there's no blood tests for things like depression. Direct blood tests, I mean. Like, there's no real diagnostic criteria beyond the subjective criteria that's in the DSM-4. So when somebody's depressed, we have to rely on a variety of symptoms, and then I can order some blood tests to rule out why someone might be feeling that. But it's not a disease like diabetes where you run lab tests and you can infer from those lab tests directly what's going on in the person's blood and in their body and in their cells. And of course the result, or the solution for depression, is much different than diabetes, especially type 1 diabetes, where it's an insulin deficiency, you inject insulin and the disease is managed. With things like depression, we have to reason backwards and try and understand what might have led to those symptoms, or what's going on in the person's body that's causing this imbalance, that's causing these symptoms to arise. So back to adrenal fatigue. So when patients come in and they are experiencing prolonged stress that begin with something called the resistance phase. So this is when you're feeling like life is busy, you've got a lot on your plate, but you almost thrive in this situation. Like, it feels kind of good. You feel like you're in control, you feel motivated, and you feel like you're getting things done. You might be tired at the end of the day, you might not be sleeping as well as you could, but and you're definitely not feeling zen, you're not feeling relaxed and like a Buddhist monk most of the time. Like, you're feeling like there's pressure on you, but you're coping. Things are okay. This is called the resistance phase. And this means that your body's producing enough cortisol to deal with the daily tasks at hand. After months to years of this, however, if this is prolonged and we're not taking enough breaks to allow our bodies to replenish, we can experience something called adrenal fatigue. This is when our body is not able to produce the cortisol needed to cover those daily tasks. So remember how I said that cortisol kind of makes us feel alert and alive and ready to deal with the day ahead of us. In adrenal fatigue, we're not able to activate that stress response when we need it because we've had it turned on all the time. It's almost like the gas tank's empty and we're kind of sputtering to get it going again. We're trying to get, our car to run on the fumes that are left over. And, we might call this burnout. This is another word for it, is burnout. And so in adrenal fatigue, and this is a really common situation that often leads to depression and often has symptoms that actually mirror or overlap with depression. In adrenal fatigue, first of all, the main symptom is just feeling tired, fatigued. There are sleep disturbances, and we feel weak, we feel unmotivated, and one of the key symptoms is that we're not relieved by exercise. So a lot of my patients will tell me, I want to exercise, I know I should exercise, but I just don't have the energy to exercise. And I'll ask them, do you feel like if you are able to push yourself to do some exercise, let's say go for a brisk 30-minute walk or even, a quick jog, how do you feel afterwards? And if they tell me that they feel like it depletes them more, this is often a sign that they're in that burnout phase, they're in adrenal fatigue. Because when you're in a resistance phase, exercise can kind of boost your cortisol a little bit. So if you're still able to make it, feels pretty good because it kind of revives you and it perks you back up. But if you're in an adrenal fatigue situation, you just don't have the cortisol reserves to get through that exercise, to get through that workout, and to feel good afterwards. So that's one of the symptoms. How cortisol is supposed to work in a healthy person that has adrenal glands that aren't depleted is when you wake up in the morning, your cortisol begins and it's high. And that's why you test blood and salivary cortisol in the morning as soon as you get up. So that means you wake up and you feel like you've slept pretty well and you're ready to start the day. You feel alert. You're not groggy. You don't wish that you could just stay in bed for the rest of the day. Throughout the day, your cortisol will, gradually decline. It might have a few dips and usually perks up with eating or exercise. So if you have a protein-rich or carbohydrate-rich meal, your cortisol can come back up, and that's, around meal times you'll feel a little bit more alert. And your cortisol will decline until bedtime when you feel tired and you feel ready to go to sleep. And it will stay low throughout the night. So you won't be waking up at night, you'll feel rested. And if you have one of those sleep trackers or a Fitbit, it will show you that you have restless sleep and that you spend a lot of your time in REM sleep or deep wave sleep. And then the cycle starts again. You wake up, your cortisol starts to peak and gets higher again. When our cortisol cycle is off, when we're in adrenal fatigue or even sort of the end stages of stress resistance, which precedes that burnout adrenal fatigue stage and often precedes depression. The resistance phase is more associated with anxiety, burnout is more associated with depression. When we're in that burnout phase, we're not able to get the cortisol up in the morning, so you wake up feeling exhausted. You will often even have a crash. You might kind of get going and ready to go, or you might just be used to having that level of energy. On a scale of 1 to 10, you might be, anywhere from a 3 to a 7. Around 10 a.m. though, you'll notice a dip in your energy. So a lot of people will have this kind of energy crash around 10 a.m. and then they get a second wind, they can kind of go. But a very typical thing that happens is around 3 to 4 p.m., 2 to 4 p.m. So, after lunch, there's a massive energy crash. And we're still at work most of the time, those of us that work 9 to 5s. And so you're at work and you're just feeling exhausted. And then people kind of get a second wind. And another thing that happens, which is not great, is that you get a second wind right before bedtime. So when you're supposed to be going to sleep, you feel this kind of tired and wired. Like you're not able to wind yourself down to get a restful night's sleep. You feel like you need to be up and on your electronics and, doing some work, catching up on some things that you need to get done. And eventually you might go to bed, and usually this happens like close to midnight or after midnight, and then most people will have a cortisol spike in the middle of the night between 2 and 4 a.m. where you wake up and are unable to fall back asleep. And thus the cycle begins again, where you've had a spike in the middle of the night, your sleep's been broken, you're tired again the next morning. So how do we get out of this cycle? Because, depression has low mood, depression has low motivation, depression has changes in weight and metabolism and appetite, and, these feelings of sadness, and adrenal fatigue and burnout have a lot of those same symptoms. There's no motivation, you're gaining weight in the abdomen, your immune system's thrown off, you're feeling just this general malaise and muscle pain and exhaustion and sadness and low mood and low self-worth and all of these things that we see in depression. So how do we solve this? So the first thing we do is, if possible, we try and manage stress, establish self-care routines. And this is a process that we need to work towards. It doesn't happen in one visit, it doesn't happen in a day. It's something that takes a few months to even years to rebuild and reestablish. We make sure that we're living a balanced life, where we're managing our cortisol, and I also might prescribe supplements and herbs to stimulate cortisol production, to help our bodies manage stress and to help our adrenal glands work more optimally. This often has a dramatic shift in mood after a few months. I have personal experience with this myself, and it's amazing. Even if in a few months you look back to where you were and you notice big shifts. It's also necessary to make sure that blood sugar is not spiking throughout the day, because cortisol and blood sugar are tightly interconnected. If our blood sugar drops, our body needs to create cortisol to bring it back up. And likewise, if our blood sugar is high, this is a stress on the body and can affect the cortisol balance. If our blood sugar is nice and steady and we're eating enough fats and proteins to keep our neurotransmitters and our hormones productive and in production in the body, we notice a more even mood and energy levels, and this is really important. So I go over nutrition and how to plan meals, especially in the morning, with a protein and fat-rich breakfast. And finally, things like bodywork, things like, if not psychotherapy or something to help with the life stressors that are going on, directly addressing those things. Even helping with the body's stress response, the body's perceived response, because a lot of the time we have stress stored in our thoughts and our emotions in the head, which is what is addressed usually with many forms of psychotherapy. But oftentimes we also store stress in the body. And so I find that acupuncture can be really effective, and there's studies that show that acupuncture actually outperforms Prozac in some 6-week trials, as well as acupuncture can also help the brain move into that parasympathetic rest and digest stage. So, 4 to 6 sessions of acupuncture can really shift us into a more relaxed state and help us with that stress response that we can often be stuck in. So for more information, visit my website. I'm at taliand.com, or you can send me an email at connect@taliand.com. I work at Bloor West Wellness in Toronto, and if you want, leave your questions or comments below, and we'll start the discussion. Thanks, bye.